the theme of preservation, something that always strikes me within your work is that it does require that type of heightened attention. Those who try to read it too fast, and I'm just coming at this from a teacher's background, the students who go really quickly and don't pay attention, especially to the buildings, especially the background details, they miss out on the story. And that's something that I think is quite important because, again, it's teaching somebody to look in a new way. It's forcing, in some cases, someone to look beyond what's happening in the front of the panel.
That's what's exciting in comics, I think. Like, for myself, I'm very interested in it as a slow medium. I think that, I mean, a lot of the work I do barely registers as a story, and so it really is very much about the actual details of reading it, like you say. I like things that are slow, and I like things that are boring. I actually think like there's something I refer to as sublime boredom, which is the sort of a thin line between things that are interesting and dull, but it's like it's a razor thin line, and you have to stay like right on the edge. And it requires, it's kind of, I always think of it as kind of like a hypnagogic state. And it's like when you're watching a very boring movie and drifting in and out of sleep. That's kind of the perfect sublime boredom. It's interesting but boring at the same time. So much of the comics I'm doing, I'm trying to achieve that actual state. And I think that has to be done slowly. If you read one of my comics like just in a very quick way, there's not much going on. And it really is all about the little details. And even with the details, there isn't that much going on. But the details add sort of they add the texture that is missing from the plot. It's all kind of about the texture of life. There's a quality of being alive that I think is the primary thing that artists are interested in imparting, depending on the artist. But and I think that can only be imparted through a certain kind of sensation you create in the reading experience, that you want someone to read it and that they get some sense of how you feel when you're in the world, your sense of being alive. And that is a complicated process and very hard to just write it down. You can only kind of do it through a kind of cumulative experience, that when you close up the book at the end, you get a kind of cumulative feeling of that artist's life experience. That's, I think, the hardest thing to get into the work, but the most important thing to get into the work, because we all have like a strange. It's strange to be alive. We have like an interior world and an exterior world. Everything we're doing is an attempt to pass between those two barriers, to impart like what we're experiencing inside to other people, and it's all symbols you're putting out. Everything you do, all the talking you do, the drawing, the comics. You're sending out symbols for other people to interpret, the facial expressions you use, and you have to hope that this interpretation somehow imparts this interior experience you're having. And that's really complicated. And I think with comics, the way that I'm trying to do it is through, as I say, this kind of accumulated sense of feeling that you have when you close the book. And that has to be kind of a slow, mechanical process to create that.
And it even ties back a little bit into sort of the idea of preservation. It's a great book by a man named Jonathan Crary. It's called Suspension of Perception, and his whole theory is that the kind of contemporary sense of attention is rather schizophrenic. You know, we're trained to watch everything in 10-second clips or bites or 140 character tweets, and that type of media will train the mind to think in a way that needs to be deconstructed, essentially. Yeah. And so when something like Clyde Fans begins with some 70-odd pages of an old man going through his routine, right, it's demanding in a sense, but it's also very necessary. And what Crary's idea of, he calls it a suspended perception, where you get into a state almost like your definition of boredom, where you can actually experience a kind of hovering out of time. So any of the many moments on a given page, and his work is not, I think, it's not very often applied to comics, and I really don't understand why, because that moment of finding that image or detail or whatnot that really cracks that barrier, I think is important. Since it will make people look. It'll
Yeah.
make them look closer and really start to see that, maybe think twice about how they think.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't think we're living in a culture that's geared towards close reading of anything. I mean, I don't really think it's been that way for a very long time, to tell you the truth. I do think it's kind of speeding up at the moment, that people have less attention spans, if you want to call it that, than they probably did 20 years ago. I don't think our attention span was fantastic 20 years ago either. But I'm aware of it even in my own life. I really feel that in the last 10 years, my ability to concentrate is less than it used to be, because I feel more scattered. I feel like there's a lot more information coming at me all the time. I do feel that the moment things slow down and I focus more on things, I feel I actually achieve like a deeper sense of well-being. To read a book in real detail as opposed to like skim your way through it quickly to move on to the next one, it's like there's a big difference in those experiences. I feel reading the computer is actually training me to pay less attention to reading, because I read in smaller chunks. I find that if there's anything of any real interest on the computer, I have to print it out to read it, because it's like the medium isn't really the perfect medium for that experience, I don't think. I don't think this is all the fault of the computer. I think the computer may just be like the culmination of where we've been going for a long time. I actually have often thought that probably if you were someone in the 19th century, someone who maybe only read the Bible, you probably have a deeper knowledge of something than we do of everything. Just because the Bible, for example, because it's the common book, probably someone who didn't read much would have read the Bible every day. I think any kind of deep knowledge is like probably superior to than a wide, vast, superficial knowledge. I certainly feel like that scattered sense in my own life that I have a wide and vast superficial knowledge, but when I feel like that I'm getting deeper into things, I do think it brings a sense of well-being that feels missing from much of society to me. That's one of the main reasons why I do want Palookaville to be slow and want it to be accumulated detail. That sequence you talked about at the beginning of Clyde Vance and also in chapter 3 are structured so that you will walk through the rooms of that building enough times that you will know the rooms well. I wanted it that by the time you get to the end of Clyde Vance, that you would know the space that the characters lived in very well, and I knew that the only way you can do that is to have the action continue to go through these rooms back and forth again, so that you're always aware where they are. That you can only do that in a kind of methodical way. And I think that there's a value in that in storytelling. If you want to slow things down, then you have to have a strong sense of place. And